The new Labour government has hit the ground running. The Tories continue to fight like rats in a sack, and there's been an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, making what was already a very interesting time in American politics even more volatile. Welcome to the latest Downtown Den Politics podcast.
Just as all bigoted women.
Me and my friends sort of used to run through the fields of wheat.
You turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
It will cost.
I know words, I have the best words, but there's no better word than stupid.
Well, hi everybody, and I'm delighted to be joined in the den as always by Downtown's political commentator Jim Hancock. I am, of course, Frank McKenna, the Chief Executive and Group Chairman of DIB. And as always, much to discuss. This week, the new Labour government, I think, hit the ground running with a whole array of meetings and set-piece initiatives, debates, discussions, speeches. So, Jim, what do you make of it? For a party that it was suggested didn't have a plan, they've not done too badly, have they?
Yes, I think, they're very conscious of the need to sort of, as they say, hit the ground running. And we've seen that in a number of respects. Obviously, there are going to be challenges. The whole planning situation, a lot of speculation with this huge number of Labour MPs. There must be some amongst them who are going to get a lot of pressure from the constituencies to kick back against more houses and things like that. But overall, I think the most important contribution was by the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. It was very interesting, actually. She got a very warm welcome, didn't she, in the Treasury when she was the first woman to do it. So I think there'll be quite a lot of sort of support for what she's trying to do. But of course, immediately the question is going to be how's she going to handle the inevitable demands from people for expenditure. The other thing that's impressed me is the early meeting with the mayors. Ben Houchin was looking a little awkward outside Downing Street, surrounded by all the others who were Labour mayors. But I think even he is, at the moment, taking part in what's a broader thing. At the moment, I think there's a sort of sense of relief that the sort of acrimonious election battle, but all the years that have gone before it, the last few years, the country sort of grinding its teeth, has dissipated. There seems to be a genuine feeling, even amongst more broad-minded Conservatives, that they've got to give this government a chance. So I think it's been a reasonably impressive first 10 days in office.
Yeah, I was in London 3 days this week and spoke to an awful lot of people that are in and around Westminster. Went to Tony Blair's Global Institute conference, which is always an interesting event. Wes Streeting spoke, Pat McFadden spoke. Great contribution from William Hague, which we may come back to actually when we talk about the Conservatives' continuing travails. But you just look at some of that activity I mentioned in the intro, Jim. You've had John Healey in Ukraine. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, has been on a bit of a whirlwind tour of some of our allies. Starmer, obviously, quite fortuitous in one sense, in that there was the big NATO meeting over in the United States, and he was given a probably warmer welcome than usual by an American president because, again, issues that we'll come on to a little later in our discussion. Then you had Rachel's speech, you had Starmer meeting the mayors, as you've mentioned, Wes Streeting meeting the junior doctors. Yeah, as I say, they've hit the ground running, and you do just sense that, firstly, a change in terms of culture and tone, which I think was important, but also I think what you're starting to see is the influence of Sue Gray. And of course, she was very experienced civil servant, been in and around Whitehall for an awfully long time. And I think you can see her fingerprints all over this first 10-day initiative. And I guess 10 days that's going to stretch into 100 days with a King's speech on the horizon, of course. So a very positive start. And just let me reference some of those conversations I had in London, Jim. I also attended a Best for Britain board meeting, some fascinating insight into the election results, and I think some significant evidence that their tactical voting campaign paid dividends right across the country. But two things that stood out for me in terms
What,
of
Labour's tactical voting campaign?
well, Best for Britain's.
I see.
Because they invested heavily in advertising in various constituencies who the best party to vote for was if you wanted to see the Conservatives defeated. And two interesting stats that came out of the conversation with Best for Britain this week. Reform were runners-up in 98 seats to Labour. So Reform, the main challenger to Labour in 98 constituencies, which I thought was fascinating. And then coming back to your point about planning reform and how challenging that is going to be for Labour and Rachel Reeves, of the 72 seats that the Liberal Democrats won, an awful lot of those are in the most affluent constituencies in the country. So we were reflecting on what the Liberal Democrats would do in this Parliament, and I would suggest looking at those statistics and that particular piece of analysis that they may be forced to oppose Labour's planning policies and reforms, potentially. And then obviously a big swathe of red up to, I think, about the 70th or even 80th constituency, Labour representing now the most deprived seats in the country. So as I say, some fascinating analysis done by Best for Britain. And yeah, that tactical voting campaign absolutely did pay dividends.
Yes, and that, I think, contributed to this very broad success for the Labour Party, that people tactically absolutely gained the first past the post system on this occasion to actually really damage the Conservative Party, which in the past has benefited from it. That and a number of very interesting things in your reply. Just going right back to the beginning of what you were saying. Of course, the chance for Keir Starmer to immediately parade himself on the international stage was absolutely vital. I mean, in the past, there's sometimes been slightly awkward attempts by British Prime Minister to get an audience with the president, and you sort of felt there was a sort of pleading element. But Keir went straight over there and was immediately in the midst of it. So that's put him on the international stage. But domestically, we'll have to wait and see how the dynamics of the Parliament plays out, because in one sense, I think we were discussing last week about Liberal Democrats. OK, they got 72 seats, but given this Labour majority, what sort of influence can they have? But you've pointed in a direction. But of course, that's a dilemma for the Lib Dems. Yes. They're going to sort of go with the NIMBYs on planning. Where does that leave their Green credentials? So I think, Davey, you'll have to play that fairly carefully. Reform, well, we'll have to see. This is really the challenge for reform now. I mean, there's been quite a spat. I think Habib, the deputy leader, has disappeared or has been sacked, or there's been some reform, some change there. Now, for me, this man is not widely known, I'm sure, to Downtown podcast listeners, but to me, he seemed one of the most able spokespersons for them. But this again illustrates how, there's a suspicion that reform might not find it easy to work together. A lot of egos, and we'll have to see how that goes. I think that's right. You've also cited other things that have been going on. Lamy going to Israel, the question of Labour recognition of the state of Israel. I think that's gone slightly more on the back burner than perhaps it was during the campaign. And then we come to the trade unions. Sharon Graham was on from Unite the other day saying, she actually firmly believed in borrowing for growth, and was already showing some irritation with Rachel Reeves' strict guidelines. And then, of course, we've got the junior doctors. Are they going to settle with Wes Streeting, or are they? I mean, for the junior doctors to call another strike would be quite a challenge for Wes. So I think imagine he'll want to try and sort that out as well. So they're now in government. There will be challenges.
Yeah, big in-tray for them. But of course, as I think it was Wes Streeting, maybe Matt Fadden reminded us at that Tony Blair Global Institute conference. Government ministers as recently as January were citing the problems that they were facing, putting the blame at the door of a 2008 financial crash. So I think Labour have got a few weeks yet before they have to start worrying about the record in government, if that's anything to go by. Just touching on that conference very briefly, Jim, it's always a fascinating event. I think it was the third time that Blair's gang have hosted it. They obviously are able to attract some fabulous speakers, you know, some great academics, some brilliant entrepreneurs. They had will.i.am speaking, would you believe? John Sopel interviewing will.i.am. I did ask Sopel whether that was the strangest interview he'd ever done, and he said to me, I've interviewed Donald Trump. So who we'll come back onto, of course, later in the podcast. But yeah, fascinating conference that focused actually on AI technology, R&D, investment in these big tech initiatives now, which could be seen as either a threat or an opportunity. And obviously the conference was focused on the positives of AI. And as I say, some fascinating speakers, and people are interested in seeing any of those contributions. And as I say, through the day, there was probably about 8 or 9 speakers who well worth a listen. You can go to the Tony Blair Institute website. The whole thing was videoed. And Blair himself hasn't lost any of his political instincts, Jim. Very, very impressive still. 71 years of age now, but still as sharp as a tack. So well worth tuning into that if you're interested in having a look at what happened during the day. And as I say, you know, Westminster itself just feels as though a new broom has been brought in and swept all before it. And change is often positive, but I do sense genuinely that you've got a Prime Minister and a cabinet in place that just want to get on with the job and do actually want to take the drama that we've seen since Brexit out of our politics. And that would not be no bad thing, in my opinion, James.
And a number of people have said that Keir Starmer looks more comfortable in the role of Prime Minister, even though it's all down to him now. And you might naturally think that the weight of responsibility would affect him adversely. But a lot of people have commented to me that he seems more relaxed now that he's in office than perhaps he did as a politician fighting for office. And I think that sort of says a lot about him, you know, in the sense that he will be quite comfortable because he's been a lawyer and he'll receive his briefs from the civil service and he'll decide what to do about it. So I think, you know, that demeanour is well suited. I mean, it's interesting, you know, I absolutely take on board what you say about Tony Blair, still sharp as a tack and so on. I mean, and then there's Gordon Brown as well, who, of course, prepared a substantial paper on devolution. Do you think those two big beasts are going to be regularly consulted, perhaps privately, by the incoming administration, or will there be a sort of sense that Labour's turned a page on that?
I think they will be privately, but I think it'll be very privately. I don't think that Keir Starmer would want the spectre of two big former Labour beasts in the wing mirror, so to speak, or being seen as overly influential. I don't think they will be. I think they will be rightly, you know, approached for advice and for counsel. I guess David Cameron possibly falls into that category as well. And why not? You know, these people have done the job. They've been through some big challenges themselves. They faced all the problems that Starmer is going to face. And in the international arena in particular, well, let's face it, no Prime Minister has experience until they get the job. Then I think it'd be daft not to seek that sort of counsel advice. But I wouldn't have expected to see Tony Gordon going into the front door of 10 Downing Street very often, I have to say. But there is, without question, you know, people who were in and around the Tony Blair Institute who are now members of Parliament. There are other think tanks, and this always happens, Jim, whichever government is elected, who've seen their former staff take positions within government. Indeed, Best for Britain have got a member of Parliament, somebody who used to work for us. So, yeah, those influences will be there. But I do sense that Keir has got himself a team which is probably led by Max Sweeney and Sue Gray. Then you've got Rachel Reeves in the mix, who have got a plan of their own. And yes, of course, they would be a bit daft to not seek some sort of guidance from time to time from people who've done the job previously. But I think by and large, that they're their own people. They've got a plan, as I say, and they'll want to implement it as quickly and as best that they can. And there is a steeliness, isn't there, about people like Rachel Reeves and Bridget Phillips, and even since the election campaign, there has been no wavering from the position that they took during the 6-week election campaign. You may have thought that there'd been a temptation for them to rip a couple of plasters off and say, oh, well, actually, behind this curtain, there is a magic lever we could pull. But no, they stuck to the script. It's a tough time. We want economic growth. And these are the things that we think we need to do to deliver that.
Yes. Just on the team, we've now got during the course of the last week, we've had the full fill out of ministers and so on. And the Northwest is pretty well represented. Obviously, Angela Rayner is deputy leader. And then the Eagles have landed again. Both Angela and Maria have got jobs. Alison McGovern, a big friend of Downtown, has got a job. And Jim McMahon is a junior minister under Angela Rayner and actually knows something about local government, so that's important. But just to get to your point, Johnny Reynolds, of course, as business secretary, precisely, in my opinion, has shown what you've just said, because he was asked recently about the Tata Steel issue. In South Wales, they want to get rid of the old blast furnaces and bring in this new electric arc system, which will mean a loss of a lot of jobs. And I just watched the way that Reynolds was interrogated, and he did not sort of say, "Oh, well, yeah, now we're in office. Yeah, we're gonna bail it out in the old traditional way." It was still, we've got our guidelines, and we'll have a negotiation with Tata about it. But obviously, in my opinion, the protection of a domestic steel industry is absolutely vital. So Johnny will have a task there. We are seeing all that playing out. And then, moving this conversation forward a bit, you've already hinted at it. The King's speech this week, I'm told it's going to be a pretty fat speech. Maybe 16 major bills. I should imagine the parliamentary session will last at least a year, maybe even to the autumn of 25. Obviously Labour will get everything through, but that will really show us what the priorities are. For instance, is devolution, more devolution? Is there going to be a devolution bill? Because they've removed levelling up. That's now a toxic phrase. I don't know whether the Northern Powerhouse is going to come back. We're long in the tooth, Frank. We've seen all these various things come and go. So, I think the King's speech is going to be a real indication of what their priorities are.
Yeah. You missed out Lucy Powell, Leader of the House, of course,
Indeed.
in terms of Northwest representation. And then it would be remiss of me not to mention our Brummie friends, Jess Phillips, back in the job that I think she is very well suited to in terms of women's rights and looking at that whole awful issue of domestic violence, which we see on a daily basis in this country. It's disgraceful, really. And then Shabib Mahmood, of course, big job in justice, and Pat McFadden, the King, who is in the West Midlands and is obviously mentioned Keir Starmer's team. McFadden came to the Blair conference and gave this virtuoso performance of half-hour interview with Soapel. He was absolutely fantastic. But once again, very focused, laser-like, in not moving from that script that we saw during the general election campaign. And then in the Northeast, we've got Bridget Phillips and, of course, education. But the mayors are going to, I think, be key personalities in this parliament, and that will be welcomed by you and I, certainly, Jim. So we will see how it unfolds. The Conservatives, on the other hand, well, they've just hit the ground. They
very good, very good.
They've been, they were chaotic during the campaign, and you would have thought, given the absolute pasting that they took, there would be some reflection, some modesty, a degree of, we better go and think about what's all gone wrong. But no, they've just come out, Suella Braverman, gloves off, swinging. Badenoch apparently went to the first shadow cabinet meeting and Tories strip off the leader of the opposition now, Rishi Sunak. You've got Jenrick, obviously already out of the tracks as far as the leadership as campaign is concerned. Then you had this PopCon conference taking place on Tuesday. So days after this huge defeat, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who basically gave up an almost 30,000 majority, is preaching to delegates about how you become a popular Conservative, which I have to tell you, Jim, was quite amusing to William Hague, who said that he preferred to be at the Tony Blair Institute conference than at the PopCon conference. So they are a mess. They are an absolute mess. And I think they are learning all the wrong lessons from that huge defeat that they took last week.
I think it's a slightly more mixed picture than you just illustrated. I mean, for instance, about a week ago, Victoria Atkins, who apparently fancies her chances, and Robert Jenrick went on the Kunzberg show, and they I mean, you can say they were just being sort of falsely coy, but they actually said now is not the time to put our hats in the ring. So I think you've got some of them who've learnt no lessons at all, and others who at the moment are fairly contrite. I mean, the key issue now is how are they going to conduct this? There are some
the leadership campaign.
Yes. There's probably the Badenoch because there's a lot of support for her amongst the grassroots. I think would like to have a quick election, and so that they can treat the Conservative Party conference as their sort of initiation and chance to get on the national stage. But I think a growing number of Conservatives think that that would be wrong, and that they, after this monumental defeat, and because of all the problems that you've just been talking about, that a lot of them still haven't smelt the coffee, need a much longer reflection. And what should happen is that there should be a consultation over the summer, that the Conservative Party conference should actually be. I know normally we say parties should look outward. Actually, the Conservative Party conference should be an internal discussion. I mean, we can all watch it, of course, about what they want to do, and then proceed to an election probably before Christmas. Now that raises then the question of Rishi Sunak, and you've got to feel for him. I think he would feel uncomfortable about doing too many prime minister's questions. There's only one before the recess, but then if my scenario played out,
want to be there for the budget in September.
Well, indeed, there's all that sort of. Well, that's interesting. If you think the budget will be in September rather than the normal autumn statement, right? Okay,
well, possibly not, but I think so.
So then it might be necessary for a patently interim leader to preside over this. Somebody who's not got an interest. Jeremy Hunt apparently won't do it, but somebody like that who has no interest in permanent leadership, seeing it through. That's what I think's really important, because you've addressed this febrile atmosphere that's in the party. A lot of deniers. A lot of people who want to do a deal with Trump. I think we mentioned it last week. Sir Edward Lee, who's the father of the House. Sir Edward Lee, Edward Lee, who's father of the House, wants Farage to be let into the party, and if he wants to stand for leader, that's fine. From that extreme to another extreme, saying we never want to touch the man. All that needs to be resolved, but we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think that the reason Atkins and Jenrick want to go long in terms of the leadership campaign is entirely due to self-interest, because they've not got the profile with the membership yet. And of course, what they look to is the Cameron election back in, what was that,
2005.
Yeah. And Cameron, of course, was nowhere. David Davis would have been elected had they gone short and just had the campaign, within a few weeks. The conference acted as, a sort of audition, wasn't it, for David Cameron? He made that fabulous speech with no notes, which impressed everybody at the time, and the rest is history. So I don't think it's a case of them being contrite or indeed showing any humility. I saw both Jenrick and Atkinson, actually. Is it Atkinson? Victoria
Atkins, the daughter of the distinguished Sir Robert Atkins, a friend of yours on the North West Assembly.
Of course, you've mentioned this before. Yeah, I do. I know her dad well. And it does amaze me, Jim, that on social media you've got Conservative former Conservative ministers having a go at the Labour Party on prisons and on the health service. And I'm thinking, where's the humility? What are you actually think? I mean, even Johnny Mercer said something about defence spending, demanding that Labour go to 2.5%. You think you guys were in charge for 14 years, didn't deliver any of this. Labour haven't been in charge for 14 days yet, and you're at them already. I think if I was advising the Conservatives, I would be saying, just take some time to, as I say, bit of humility, bit of reflection, as you said, inward conversations. Frustrating because, of course, they've been at the top of the tree for a long time. They're used to making decisions. But actually, the country has spoken and have told them they may not be in love with the Labour Party. They may be quite right in that assessment. But I tell you what, they absolutely hate the Tories at the moment. And they need to be quiet. They need to, as I say, go away, lick the wounds, and come up with a strategy that probably won't get them back to power at the next election, but could certainly put them on the right track. And of course, going back to that analysis from Best for Britain, then it's not tagging to the right that's necessarily going to win them an awful lot of votes back. It's those Liberal Democrat seats that they lost, which should be their initial target, I would suggest. And the other thing I'll point out, and I think I said this in our last podcast, is only 38% of Reform voters said that had there not been a Reform candidate, they'd have voted Tory. 19% of Reform voters said that without a Farage-backed candidate in their constituency, they'd have voted Labour. So they need to drill into those numbers. They need to start to find a way in which they can return, in my view, to the centre-right, because it's only from the centre that the Conservatives, or indeed Labour, ever win elections in the UK. We will see. It's going to be a fascinating few months within the Tory party. There's probably only people like you and I going to be watching, James, because most people have stopped listening to them, let's face it. You surprised that Esther McVey has either not been given a place in the shadow cabinet or has decided not to take it? I'm not sure which is the case. I haven't seen her given a job.
No, she hasn't. I mean, I think, to be honest, at the moment, who's in the shadow cabinet is not particularly important. I don't know what tack Esther's going to take on things. I had some communication with her during the election. Actually, I was going to do a hustings in the Tatton constituency. It didn't happen in the end, but I just dropped her a line and was very agreeably surprised when I actually got a nice friendly reply from her the following day. So I've known Esther for a long time. I think she is an asset to the party. I think she could have been used more in the campaign, but she might be throwing a hat in with the right and doesn't want anything to do with Sunak at the moment. But I daren't speak for her. But I think she'll, hopefully have a prominent role in the future of the Conservative Party, because her hinterland, her backstory in working class Liverpool is something that is what the Conservative Party need for precisely the reasons that you've mentioned.
And I think if you want a job, you can have one, can't you? Because there's only enough of them to cover the various shadow briefs that you need. So yeah, it will be interesting. Anyway, James, enough of domestic politics, because over the weekend, Donald Trump had an attempt made on his life, and if American politics wasn't febrile enough, then obviously this is just going to heighten tension. So we're going to take a short break and talk about all things USA. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the latest episode of the Downtown Den Politics podcast with me, Frank McKenna, and the eminent James Hancock. We were talking just before the break about all things UK politics, but if we look across the pond, what happened at the weekend, an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And I think, Jim, you've been flagging for some months now concerns about the way in which politics in America was heading, and this sadly confirms your worst fears, I think.
Yes, I'm afraid I frequently refer to my great age and so on. I remember the awful year of 1968. Where there are considerable parallels. Lyndon Johnson announced that he wasn't going to stand again. Unlike Joe Biden, Johnson realized the weight of the Vietnam War was just compromising his presidency, and he wouldn't stand again. Then we had the assassination of Martin Luther King, followed rapidly by the person who wanted to succeed Johnson, Robert Kennedy. And then we had a Democrat convention in Chicago, which was riots outside against the Vietnam War, and it was a very, very troubled year. And Richard Nixon emerged from all this as the president of the United States, and at the time was regarded as an incredible right winger, and was going to threaten democracy, or did threaten democracy with the Watergate break-in. Little did we know that we'd eventually have a person like Donald Trump. But we've got this. I mean, only a week ago, the whole emphasis was on whether Joe Biden was going to stand down. Then we've had this. I mean, my immediate reaction is that, and I obviously, like every decent person, expresses our sympathy for Donald Trump and his bravery in the immediate aftermath of the incident. You can say it was political campaigning, raising his fists and so on, but to compose himself in any way immediately after that, when he was literally within an inch of being killed, was in its way impressive. But of course, in my opinion, I may be proved wrong, but I think in a tragic, awful way, that means that Donald Trump is going to be elected as president of the United States now. Because the way I see it, the incident has frozen the issue of Joe Biden being removed. I can't quite explain it, but I sort of feel that this call for calm that both Trump and Biden have expressed surely means that the Democrats agitating against Biden, at a time when people are calling for calm, I think it's chilled that issue. So at the moment, looks to me as if Joe Biden will be the candidate now, and Donald Trump, the hero, the man who survived it, and a lot of commentary I've heard, Frank, and we don't have a sort of similarity in this country, but people feeling that God has preserved him for a purpose. That is, whether you and I agree with it's neither here nor there. A lot of Americans feel things like that. So the convention this week, I mean, it's just going to be astronomical, the sort of applause you can just see as he walks on the stage, presumably with his ear bandaged. The sort of the hero has come through this. It just plays completely into his playbook. Without us even going into the conspiracy theories that are going on about the Democrats would do anything to get rid of him, including this, and which is a lot of stuff on the social media saying that. So that's my political reading of it. We can talk also about America, which allows guns to be used, and of course the huge issue about the security breach, how on earth it was allowed to happen. I mean, Gary O'Donoghue, I must say a big up for him. I'll stop in a moment, Frank. The BBC reporter, I think, did a sterling job in getting an interview with the guy. He said, I was pointing to him, the cops were saying, oh yeah, doing nothing about it. I mean, normally all roofs around a venue like that would have a security sniper, somebody from the security services on all those sort of roofs with a gun. That's what you normally see. You see it on the White House. So there's this huge issue about security, without suggesting for a moment that the Democrats had organized it to try and kill their opponent, which is part of the toxic atmosphere of debate in America.
Yeah, that toxicity, as you mentioned there, Jim, right at the end, is something that I do worry about now in terms of the state and what happens next. I think that we would all obviously condemn an assassination attempt on a leading political figure wherever that happens. We've seen MPs assassinated in this country or murdered in this country, and we saw some vicious, violent attacks in America, which ironically have not necessarily been condemned as much as they ought to have been by Donald Trump, for example. Nancy Pelosi's husband very seriously injured in an attack which was meant for the former Speaker of the House, and Trump sort of mocked it. He didn't show any sympathy whatsoever. So, although we absolutely are right in condemning that attempt on his life, he is, in my opinion, the main reason why American politics has descended into the toxicity that it has. He's got to take some responsibility for that. I think, on the other hand, Joe Biden's response to the assassination attempt was what you'd expect, I guess, from a president, but he said all the right things. But when you compare and contrast, Trump shot, okay, not seriously injured, but nevertheless, anybody in that situation would have been shook up. And for him to get to his feet and show that political, almost animal instinct, I think Hillary and Clinton described it as when she faced him in that campaign back in 2016, insist on getting the Secret Service guys out the way, pumping his fist, shouting, fight, fight, fight. All the crowd is chanting, USA, USA, USA. You've got this iconic photograph now of Trump, fist held aloft, blood coming from his ear, American flag in the background, the sun shining. You can see his evangelical base, Jim, absolutely using that as the campaign poster for the remainder of what is left of this presidential race. And I take your point. I think it's going to be really difficult, certainly over the next week, for the Democrats to have that conversation about removing Joe Biden. But if they don't, then they simply have to accept that come November, we will have a second Trump presidency, because there is no way that Biden beats Trump. I think it'd be difficult for any candidate to beat him. A short period of time. You know what it's like, Jim. Campaigns get momentum. And, on one hand, this is an absolute tragedy. We haven't mentioned the fact that there was a fatality, of course, the firefighter who was just simply attending that rally. And again, absolutely appalling that you go to a political event and you can be putting your life at risk. But that momentum is with Trump. If the Democrats don't replace Biden, they are absolute toast. But then it comes down to, I suppose, the question of who would want to fight Trump now at this juncture, because you are going to be the underdog as a Democrat. And if you fail to beat him, then that's it for you. So if you are Gretchen, or you're one of the other people who've been mentioned as a potential alternative to Joe Biden, I guess your political antennae would say to you, wait until the time after next, because Trump is probably home and hosed now.
Yes, I mean, as I understand it, before this assassination attempt, there wasn't a feeling of inevitability that it would have to be Kamala Harris if she wants it. I mean, you illustrate a reason why she might not, but I think she's the only one, actually, Jim. Sorry to interrupt. She is the only one, actually, it might still be attracted to, because she would be seen as part of the problem. If they get a thumping in November and she is on that ticket, she ain't running for president 4 years later. So that's why I think she might, and also, if he did stand down, that she would feel it her duty, in inverted commas, as the vice president. I mean, that's what vice presidents are for, normally in the case of death. But, obviously in this situation, that's what they're there for, to stand in. So I think, and there's also the question, which we've already discussed, that the campaign money has been given to the Biden Harris ticket, and raising money for Gretschmer or Newsom would be more problematic. So it would be her. Some people have said, I've heard sort of communications experts saying, give me 90 days, I can sell her to the American people. Her recognition would immediately rise, and, that would be a contest. But I just return to what I've already said and what you've already said. They'll now be facing somebody who's got that iconic picture, whether they want it or not, of a fighting warrior, leading America, and if it was Kamala Harris, she would raise all the issues that we are likely to face in terms of Trump really putting the democratic system under strain with the courts and his claims for revenge and doing away with the Department of Education. I believe he wants to do away with. I don't know. There would be all that, but I think she would be sort of doing her duty to lead the Democrats to as slight a defeat as they possibly could, because
maybe more success in the Senate and the House, Jim.
Well,
again,
yes,
I think this is where the Democrats are really concerned.
Yes,
that Trump could end up with the three pillars of the American state under his control, and unlike any president that I can remember, he really would have control, because he's got total control of the GOP, of the Republican Party, and that is unusual. Even when you've had a Democratic president, Republican president, they still face challenges from the Senate or from the House, whereas Trump would have this, almost, dare I say it, almost this autocratic approach, I think, to government, which would be dangerous. And so the Democrats, in my view, have a duty to say to Biden, you cannot win this race, and you are going to damage the party brand, and therefore we would lose good candidates in those other elected branches of government. So you've got to go. So that's my view of it. We'll see what happens over the next week or so. The thing about politics these days, it does move very quickly, and we'll probably be talking about something else in 7 days. Whereas at one point, an assassination attempt on a presidential candidate, that would have dominated the news for months. You can see things will shift on. I'd say final thing on this from me, Jim, then I'll let you come back and conclude the conversation as far as this is concerned. Trump has been very reflective since the assassination attempt, and has taken advice clearly to say, calm things down, don't do the usual thing and go out and be mean about people and be your same old robust, aggressive self. Perhaps whoever's giving him that advice, I would say the Conservative Party in this country should be on the phone to them. He's shown the sort of humility and reflection that I think the Tories should be shown. But it's been, I think, from Trump, a good reaction, Jim.
Yes. The thing about Donald Trump is that he has the support of a very large and absolutely fanatical and solid base. The people are going to vote for him, and without equivocation, they're not going to be moved almost by anything. Where he said well, unfortunate thing to say in these circumstances, but he's like, I go and shoot someone in the street and people my supporters would still vote for me. I mean, it's absolutely solid, but it is not enough. He does need some of the undecideds. Now, the number of undecideds in America is fleetingly small. I think, is it about 10% of the population are undecided? 90% are one way or the other. So he does need some of those undecideds. And this demeanor that he has adopted a bit in the last few weeks, even before the assassination, when Biden was having all his problems, Trump was fairly silent because he didn't need to say anything. He just watched the spectacle was what he was doing. So he needs a few of those. So it may be that we see less of the tub thumping, so that Trump can win over and he will have amongst some of the undecideds a sympathy vote now, I would have thought.
For sure. And the thing is, Jim, what you've referenced there is absolutely right. You've got a massive chunk of people who are right behind Trump, and similarly group of people that are behind Biden. But what the weekend's events will prove, I think, is that those people who are for Trump will absolutely go to the ballot box in November. You can't say the same about the people who are supporting Joe Biden. That's why I think the Democrats have got to get an alternative candidate in place. Right, well, that was a very serious and tragic event. And last night, I sat through 90 minutes of another tragic event, which was England. God, Jim, when are we going to win a game? When are we going to get it over the line? It's 58 years since we won a major trophy.
I was there. I was
It's
there
worse
with
than
my
ever. Well, I
father,
know, Jim,
and he said to me, "It'll be a long time before you see this again." That's what he said as the referee blew his final whistle. That's what he said.
and he was right. Oh dear me. What are your feelings about the football and Gareth Southgate and the team?
I think a lot of it centres on Harry Kane. Southgate was really loyal to him, but I think he was. Sorry to say, a little bit of a drag on the team. I just was struck, particularly in the later games, that when the subs came on, Watkins and Cole and people like that, they were just more dynamic, and that Harry Kane may have been carrying some sort of injury. Maybe we'll find out eventually, but it would have been a difficult call. He was not only, he was iconic player, but also the captain. Bellingham, I don't think performed as we expected. Phil Foden, again, some of those big beasts didn't perform well. But I mean, the overall thing is going to be that his cautious approach. The Spanish played with more vigor and determination. I felt more attractive, and there's a blame here that Gareth was holding back some of these players, and but we'll see. I don't know what you think. I think he probably will call it a day now.
Yeah, I think he will. I think it's a hell of a pressurised job anyway, because we can all be England managers, can't we? We all like to pick our favourite 11. And he's got huge media following, of course, and interest and pressure from them. And the players, I think, have talked about how distracting they find some of that media attention at times. But that's what being an England player is about. And I think it's the same for the other international teams, by the way. And you looked at the Spanish team, and I think that's what it was. It was a team. And even when Rodri, who's arguably their best player, went off at half-time, and the commentators were suggesting this gave England half a chance. Well, the guy who came on, can't even remember the lad's name, but he had a cracking game. But they just slot into positions and they all seem to know the job. Well, you feel as though England are trying to put round pegs in square holes at times. Can Bellingham, a bit like the Gerrard Lampard debate we had for all those years, can Bellingham and Foden actually play in the same team? Do you have to just make that really difficult decision? Both world-class players, but very similar in terms of the job they do. Harry Kane, I totally agree with you, should have been dropped after the first round of matches. He was nowhere near at the races, nowhere near his best. Whether he's injured, long, hard season, whatever, I don't know. But he wasn't suited to that tournament. And then I think we needed some pace. And I've said this throughout the various matches that we played. I would have liked to have seen Anthony Gordon given a bit of a run. I would have liked to have seen Trent Alexander-Arnold again. I don't think Kyle Walker's had a particularly good tournament this time around. So Trent Alexander-Arnold can whip a ball in, can get forward, can get back. So I'm left frustrated because this is what England does. Say, well done, boys. At least you got us to the final. But you look at the route, it wasn't particularly challenging. Spain beat France, they beat Germany, they beat us. I think did they beat Portugal, Chris? Not sure whether they did. But Chris, our producer, by the way.
They beat Italy. in the group stages.
Yeah. They beat all the big teams. We got there by, we didn't beat any big beasts, if I can put it that way. And yet it'll all be about our poor Gareth and the boys. And I'm left with that feeling that if he'd have just took the handbrake off, then actually we might have been, as the old saying goes, bringing it back home. But there you go. It didn't happen, unfortunately. And this isn't a football podcast. It's a politics one. So I'll shut up. James and I can go and lick our wounds and watch what the next 7 days of political activity brings and unfolds, because I'm sure whatever happens, we'll have much to discuss next week. Remember, until then, don't do anything I wouldn't do. That's it from the Downtown Den Politics podcast for another week. Hope to see you all again next Monday.